I earned my bachelor's and my master's degree from Roosevelt University. I am currently the advisor for racial equity and minority student success at the Chicago College of Performing Arts at Roosevelt University. I myself am a professional performing artist and racial justice advocate and activist. It is my pleasure to be here today to welcome you all to Roosevelt's first Black Alumni Association event. The association was formed by alumni relations this fall to create meaningful educational programs, connections, and resources for our community here at Roosevelt. As a part of Roosevelt University's commitment to social justice, the association will help ensure that Black students and alumni have equal opportunities to success, both personally and professionally. I'd like to take a moment just to reflect a bit on my new role at the Chicago College of Performing Arts as the advisor for racial equity. This year, our Black students in CCPA, both in our music and theater conservatories, have gone through an extremely hard year. Our challenges around social unrest, around racial equity in our larger society, as well as COVID disproportionately impacting communities of color, but specifically Black folks, has really been devastating for many of our Black students in CCPA. My role this year, I feel like, is more important than ever. I feel like now is the time that we as an institution have to look at and reevaluate and reassess our commitment to our Black students, to really fully see them as full, actualized students who come to Roosevelt University seeking an opportunity to change the world through their art, through their music, through culture. Unfortunately, that has been a very challenging thing. And so I am here to make sure that CCPA, as well as our entire college, remains committed to advancing and correcting the systemic issues of racism within CCPA. Obviously, for many people who may already know, our music and theater conservatory focuses heavily on classical music in the music conservatory and also in the classical theater arts as well. And so I'm happy to be here in this role. I know that this is something that our students need and value. And so I'm just happy to be here today, making a difference at my alma mater. We're honored today to have two very special alumni with us. I'd like to introduce our moderator, Jeri Bingham, and keynote speaker, Ameshia Cross. Jeri is a communications marketing executive with more than 25 years experience working in higher education, nonprofits, and advertising. She is the founder and host of HushLoudly, Introverts Redefined, a WGN radio podcast dedicated to amplify the voices of introverts. She was most proud this year of her recent interview with fellow introvert Valerie Jarrett, former senior advisor to President Barack Obama. Ameshia Cross is a leader in advocacy, public policy, and progressive politics. Currently, Amisha is a political commentator for the Sinclair Broadcast Group. She writes and produces her own show, Crosspoint, featuring daily commentary on hot-button political issues. She has experience across many policy arenas. At the Pretrial Justice Institute, Amisha leads state policy and coalition engagement for bail reform throughout the country. Amisha has significant experience working in communications and advocacy campaigns right here in her hometown of Chicago, with roles focused on education, environment, and healthcare policy initiatives. She was a former communications analyst on President Barack Obama's 2012 campaign. It's an honor to have you both here today. Thank you for joining us. Jeri, I will turn it over to you to start today's discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Adrian. And I have to give a shout out to one of my favorite professors who joined us, Professor Trewick, who in our first class was playing Earth, Wind, and Fire. I'll never forget that as we talked about multicultural marketing. So, hey, Professor Trewick. So, thank you for this opportunity. And I'm excited to be here with you today and to also hear from Amisha, who has an amazing story and so much to offer and to inspire us. So we're just going to get started. So for our first question, Amisha, what first sparked your interest in public policy and advocacy, and how did you first get your foothold in the political sphere?
That sounds like an easy question, but it's a lot more loaded than you think. My family is a long-ranging group of advocates, specifically starting with my grandparents and my great-grandparents who migrated to Chicago from Mississippi during the Great Migration. And my grandfather specifically, he led a lot of voting rights campaigns and voting access campaigns across the state of Mississippi during a time where it just wasn't something that people like who look like any of us on this Zoom would have had access. And I think that hearing those stories growing up and him taking me back to some of the places where a lot of people actually lost their lives trying to be able to access the right to vote meant a lot to me as a kid. And seeing the places where he wasn't allowed to go and eat, or the places where he wasn't allowed to go and shop because of the color of his skin, and knowing that he was willing to pretty much put his life on the line to make sure that that ended. And then moving to Chicago and seeing that even though it was a big city, it still had a lot of the covert racism that was a lot more overt in a place like Mississippi. My grandfather worked in the steel mills at a time where he wasn't allowed to join unions, at a time where Black people weren't allowed to join unions. So they didn't have the protections that a lot of their white counterparts did. And I think that, growing up in an environment where my grandparents were so vocal about their experiences, and I was homeschooled as a kid, having a mom who was very serious about showcasing the plight of Black America, and having early on read some of the greatest writings, I think, in the stories of people who had lived the life of civil rights leaders who weren't necessarily in our most common history books, really shaped me. And I took hold of that. And by the time I did go to high school, I went to a public high school, I was president of my college Democrats. I was involved in several community organizations and organizations across my campus, and decided that I was going to major in political science and journalism. And I went off to college at Nashville, Tennessee, Belmont University, which is a music school technically, but I went there and majored in poli-sci and journalism, became college Democrats president there, in addition to a staff writer and then editor of my college newspaper. I worked on my first Senate campaign there, Harold Ford Jr.'s, in addition to Barack Obama's in 2008. I graduated a year later and actually moved to DC and worked for him here for a little while. I'm currently in DC, and then shifted back to Chicago. My heart's in Chicago. So I came there and worked for Rahm. Worked for Rahm's campaign during his first administration, as well as in his administration in communications there. And my foothold really came from watching what was going on with my people in my community. Seeing that I lived in South Shore, so 75th and South Shore Drive, 71st and Jeffrey, watching the poverty, watching the gun and gang violence, seeing bodies in the streets, and knowing that there were schools that would have to shut down early because they didn't want their young people to have to walk across the street because ambulances hadn't come to pick up the dead bodies yet. That was my experience in Chicago. And I think that a lot of my drive for public policy and policy change came from working in schools and talking to young people and living in the communities that were some of the hardest hit, and seeing that every day. And the story is not jiving with some of the things I saw in the news and some of the elected officials I talked to. As someone who lobbied the state of Illinois and lobbied the city of Chicago and now works in lobbying at the federal level as well, those conversations that I have with people are often with people who have no cognition of what the real Chicago is like, no cognition of the fact that a lot of our young people are just doing the best they can to get by, and with the understanding and the caveat that this is life for them. And many don't see anything past the communities they grew up in. And I think that a lot of that, that culminating experience and the words of my late grandfather and his experiences helped to push me to wanting to not only get involved in policy, but also to understand the nuts and bolts of what actually makes change. because as much as I love the advocacy work and as much as the protesting matters and as much as, shining a light on a lot of our nation's most dire ills matters, the thing that is going to really change that is having our voices heard, not only at the ballot box, but also by holding our elected officials' feet to the fire. And one of the things that I've enjoyed over the course of my career is teaching and training our community, other Black people, about how to do that, because you do it more than once every 4 years. You have to be able to understand the structures at B and how to get them to respond to you. And, encouraging and teaching and training individuals on how to do that has been probably the most vital and the most rewarding part.
So I'm going to say it's been ingrained in you since birth. It's what you were supposed to be doing and are doing. I wonder if if you decide to ever run for anything, I'm sure we'll be supporting you. So just let us know if you're ever thinking about that. So the next question is, you mentioned recently that Black female ascension is a battle daily. Thinking back on your journey, what has been your source of inspiration to keep going, and especially now?
A lot of things. For my mom, full disclosure, I grew up in a single parent household. My grandparents were great influences, but I didn't meet my father until I was about to graduate college. My mom did everything by herself. No child support, no birthday cards. I still don't think my dad knows my birthday today. I think that having a mom who did it all, who showcased to me that it was possible to take on so many different roles. And she let me know about when times were hard. She didn't shy away from telling her kids that this is difficult, but it can be done. I think that was something that was definitely formative for me. But in addition to that, I am very serious about bail reform because my mom also suffered from mental illness. And having a mother who had manic depression or what is now referred to as bipolar, and growing up and seeing that, it shaped me in a lot of ways because I have four other siblings, and there came a point where my mom would refuse medication, where she would refuse, help and evaluations. And as a kid, when you have to deal with that and you somewhat have to parent your mom in addition to helping out with your siblings every day, you learn to grow up really fast. And my mom, due to her mental illness, was actually incarcerated and died in prison. And I oftentimes look back on that and I think about the fact that we found out, me and my family, that my mom had stage 4 colon cancer while she was in prison because our family couldn't afford bail. We were food stamp kids. We were kids who grew up on Medicaid, and there just was no extra funds anywhere. I think that the will and the fight of my mom and what I saw in her and what I saw in my grandmother, those will always be the strongest female influences for me, because I know that in the Black community, specifically among Black women, there is a courage, there is a strength, there is a fight through all types of darkness and hell that most people would break from, that I think speaks loudly and proudly, not only to the heritage, but also to a people that are unified in large part by many Black women who lead entire communities, not to mention their own families.
Mm-hmm. Wow, okay. You have extensive experience as a community organizer. What power do ordinary people like us who aren't political candidates have to shape our country? What can we do and what should we be doing?
First off, I hate the term ordinary people unless we're talking about that John Legend song. I think that for all of us, there is a recognition that you have more power than you think and more power than elected officials. And I say that because elected officials bend to the will of those who get them in office. And the people who get them in office, or who make sure that they get out of office, are those who actually show up. Okay. Our voices are heard loudly and proudly when we organize. And when we organize, things change. The reason why Black Lives Matter is more heard of and it has more push from organizations and companies across the country who are donating money to a lot of Black organizations and causes is because of what we saw happen this summer. And what we saw happen this summer was a result of thousands upon thousands of Black people in communities across the country deciding that enough was enough. That police brutality, we didn't want to take it anymore. That we were tired of being treated as second-class citizens in a country that we have literally been in since the late 1600s. I think that for Black people specifically, when we talk about what it means to be American citizens, what it means to take part in our democracy, what it means to lead, a lot of that power is invested in us. Now, whether or not we manifest it and realize it are two very different things, but a little organizing goes a very long way. because when we organize, when we get together, when we are fighting for something bigger than ourselves, we will get noticed and we will get recognized. And it forces elected officials to make a change, whether they are inherently hard people or not. I think we have to recognize that the majority of change in this country didn't occur because people had some hardship notion and wanted to change. We talk about people like, President Abraham Lincoln, for instance. He didn't free the slaves because he just loved Black people and wanted to end, a humanitarian crisis. He did it because he was out of at least 16 other options, and opposition rose up against him as well. I think that for us, it is recognizing our power, recognizing that organizing gets things done, organizing not only online through social media campaigns, but also in the streets, and not allowing ourselves to get tired. Because to a certain extent, America has a habit of bending back towards injustice a whole lot more than it has moving towards justice or moving towards equity. So you have to keep your feet on the fire. You have to make sure that you're continually pressing the button. And you have to make sure that you're always counting out and calling out the powers that be, because they don't automatically work in our interest. Our interest as African Americans, our interest as people of color, is always the last at the table and the last one to be thought about. So we have to make sure that we are pushing that envelope, making sure that we are always loud, making sure that we are always present, and making sure that we are not afraid, not only not afraid to organize, but not afraid of opposition. Because the more we organize, the more we're going to see these little entryways of opposition that pop up. And I think that to a certain extent, there has to be, just like what we're seeing with Stacey Abrams in Georgia, someone who is not harmed by losing, but understands that sometimes even in loss, there's a greater thing waiting for you on the other side, and to keep going.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. You write and produce your own show, Crosspoint, with the Sinclair Broadcast Group. Can you tell us about what led you to this role and what attracted you to the analyst side of politics?
Absolutely. So it's kind of a fluke to a certain extent, because I am a policy wonk at heart. I'm a writer. I also lobby a lot. I'm used to talking to elected officials at the state, local, and federal level. I'm used to working for them, either designing their communications platforms or doing things for them on social media, making sure that they're able to speak to people like the folks on this call. But in addition to that, one of the things that actually, I guess, got me recognized in that sense was the work that I was doing around bail reform and criminal justice reform over the past few years. Specifically, it also brought me to the White House, and actually, in a tangent story, to work with the Trump administration to a certain extent on the First Step Act. As you guys probably know, that was actually a bipartisan effort with a lot of community organizations that were left-leaning as well as those from the right. And for me, having a parent who lost her life as incarcerated, it meant a lot to step up and to do that type of work across the country in terms of bail reform and making sure that money wasn't the thing that kept people who shouldn't have been in jail to begin with there. And a lot of those people end up looking like all of us. I think that from that conversation and the work that I was doing there, in addition to being featured on some panels and doing some live discussions during the 2018 midterm election sessions, it kind of got noticed from the Sinclair Broadcast Group, specifically because a lot of my predictions actually happen to be true. One of the things that is interesting about analysis is, as you probably know, it can go one of two ways. Pollsters this past election cycle were extremely wrong. Some of them more wrong than they were in 2016. But analysis is different. Analysis is you looking at a problem or looking at a person who's running and picking and choosing what you think are some of their strengths and weaknesses and how they'll be able to succeed or what's going to make them fail. And for me, it has always been, even though I was born in Chicago, I was raised in the South, in Mississippi and Florida. So I have a very strong understanding of rural America and suburban America, as well as the inner cities, which I can say from working with elected officials, most do not. They are very much one-sided in the area that they've been siloed into. A lot of elected officials in Chicago have no understanding of what's going on in rural areas or in downstate Illinois. And that's not singular to Chicago, that happens across the country. One of the strengths that I have is that the ability to understand how people think and what matters to them in places across various economic and socioeconomic areas, but also across cultures. And I think that, that happened to bring me to the analyst part of things. But the other thing was a lot of sheer luck. Like I said, that the midterms went in the way that I expected them to go, but literally 2 weeks afterwards, I was invited to a luncheon in downtown DC with a whole lot of elder Caucasian males, which, you know, as the lowly Black person, you never know how that conversation is going to go. And I was actually offered a position at that luncheon. So everything kind of moved pretty swiftly after that.
Wow. Okay. You covered the 2020 election in depth. Can you tell us about a particularly affecting moment or a conversation with a voter?
Sure. I would probably say the most affecting moment of 2020, and there are a couple, but the most affecting would probably be during the primaries. For anybody who was watching, and I know it seems like light years away at this point, but for anyone who was watching, Joe Biden did not do very well until South Carolina. I think that there was a lot of disbelief. There was a lot of failure. We saw Iowa. We saw a lot of the early states not necessarily go the way that was expected. Fundraising wasn't where it needed to be. There wasn't a lot of excitement around the campaign, and pretty much everybody had counted him out. I had traveled to South Carolina more than a few times, and I had covered several people, specifically young Black people, but also people of other demographics. And the conversation was that, specifically among Black women, don't count him out. Don't count him out. The media, no matter who you talk to, CNN, Fox, MSNBC, everyone thought that Joe Biden's campaign was in the tubes. And lo and behold, the little older African-American women from the churches in South Carolina, and I say little because I'm almost 6 feet tall. These women were about 5'1". They had a love, they had a strength, they were willing to knock on doors, they were talking, they were making calls. These people said that they were going to turn people out and to not worry. And lo and behold, after South Carolina, things started looking up. After South Carolina, it became clearly apparent, one, that Black people were going to be the pathway for Joe Biden's victory, but also that Black women's power in organizing was unmatched by any other group in any other demographic. And I think that that was definitely probably the strongest lesson learned, that even when you feel like somebody's been completely counted out by everyone, the fundraising is down, they're not necessarily confident in what's going to happen, you have this group of people who just say, we're going to help you to make it through. And they carried him on their backs.
Beautiful, beautiful. How has disinformation affected our current political moment? And what can we do to be responsible consumers of media?
That's a great question, a loaded one, one that I think existed beyond the Trump administration. We have to recognize that disinformation is a part of campaigns in general. But what we've seen with President Trump and what we've seen with the weaponization of social media is something that we actually haven't seen in this country before, where you have a president who is coaxing conspiracy theories, who is retweeting conspiracy theories. You have these individuals and conservative groups on social media, be it whether it is Facebook or Twitter, and they're carrying on things in an echo chamber. So it makes it seem like it's the truth. And sometimes they have statistics, not real ones that can be backed up in any way, but they have statistics and they have videos that they've doctored on YouTube. I know there was one that came out during the primaries where they were trying to make Nancy Pelosi look like a drunk. And what ended up happening was they created a video where they slow rolled it and they cut and spliced different pieces to make it look as though she was not sober when she gave her presentation, when literally side by side with the actual video, it was a complete lie. I think that one of the things that we have to do as consumers is to be careful what we share. Because part of the issue is that a lot of these incorrect videos and incorrect statements get shared millions of times over. Make sure that it's coming from a reputable source. It makes us almost become journalists. It makes everybody almost become a journalist. Make sure that when you look at it, that it is not somebody somewhere's blog, that it has been cited by, or the AP is actually reporting it. That, well, at this point, you know, on Twitter, at least, because Twitter is running that little banner telling you that that it's kind of fake news. But for the most part, you have to be able to understand that it should, if it is legitimate, it should be available on multiple sources and in multiple areas. And if it is not, and if it cannot be substantiated, do not share it. And we have to recognize that the misinformation campaign, especially during this presidential cycle, was largely targeted at African Americans, and specifically African American men. I think that what we've seen from conservatives, what we've seen from a lot of, and not just conservatives, what we've seen from a lot of Trumpites who aren't traditional Republicans, but are, you know, following a cult of leadership. These are individuals who relish in the fact that they can get people to follow them by any means necessary. And they play to some of your most innate problems. These are individuals who understand how to communicate. So they will take your fears, whether it's a fear of immigrants coming into your community and taking your jobs. White people aren't the only people who believe that. Black men on the south side of Chicago believe it as well. And they will target specific ads and specific commercials, specific things on your social media to that fear. What they have done is uniquely understood what bothers American people in certain demographics. And they've been able to target specific messaging to that because they understand that these are things that innately you already have some questions about. So if they make it look like it's a fact and they push it to you, then all of a sudden it becomes something that gets ingrained. And the more that you hear it, repetition breeds reality. The more that you hear it, the more that you see it, after a while it sinks in, and it's very hard to undo. I will give it to the misinformation campaign and the Trump administration, the Trump campaign. They have a very strong handle on social media. They have a very strong handle and understanding of the psychology in general. And that's not to say that, but this is literally how cult of personality works. And it's not only in America. We've seen people do it in China. We've seen people do it in Russia. We've seen people do it across the globe. This is something that dictators do. But here, specifically over the past 8 years, we've seen a manipulation of media in a way that is very dangerous, because from the White House, we saw a president who also tried to diminish the strength and the belief that our major media was legitimate. We saw him shut down ABC. We saw him call out reporters. We saw him cut them out of White House briefings. We saw him delegitimize strong news sources, including the AP, including the BBC, including all of these that people have been listening to for decades, just because he didn't like what they were saying. That's not how this should work. And I think that we as consumers have to start calling it out. We have to recognize that sometimes we're going to read things about people that we don't like. Sometimes if you're in the public eye, you're going to see things about yourself that you don't like. But most of the time, there's some shred of truth to it. Unless you read it in Star magazine, there might be some shred of truth to it. That doesn't mean that you should shut down the entire media landscape because you read something about yourself that wasn't glowing. Because that's media, the press, is supposed to be a pseudo branch of government. It is supposed to provide a check and a balance to what you do. They're not supposed to be your best friends. They're not supposed to cozy up to you. They're supposed to be the window into your administration for the general public. So if they're only producing and talking about the things that you want them to talk about, they are not doing their job.
Right. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, thank you. That was a great answer. I'd like to just ask, we are going to open it up to the audience for questions, but I personally would just like to ask about what's next for you? What's on the horizon for Amisha?
That is, oh, geez, people ask me this. So we're looking at a president-elect and a new administration. So I've been fielding opportunities there. So we'll see, what shakes down there. Ultimately, I'm actually going to be getting engaged the next week. So
congratulations.
And planning on within the next couple of years, it depends on, how the administration goes and things there. I will more than likely be coming back to Chicago. Chicago's home. DC has been good, but Chicago's my life. So my family's there. I love the South Side.
Well, wonderful. We'll welcome you back wholeheartedly. I see there is one question here. What do you hope that the next administration will do for the African American community in terms of economic stability with jobs, businesses, and also education?
Great question. And I've read the Build Back Better plan. I've read the plan that was specific to the African American community, the Marshall Plan that came out from President-elect Biden. And I know that Kamala Harris specifically has ideas about how to reform HUD, the Housing Administration. One of the things that I hope comes out of this in the wake of COVID-19 is specifically money that is given towards the rebuilding of our Black economy and small businesses. Because what we saw with the PPP loans is that the majority of those went to businesses that exist across multiple states, businesses that were not necessarily what we would consider small businesses. These were chain restaurants and chain stores and things like that. And over 75% of it went to white businesses. What we know is that the people who hire Black people the most are Black people. And small businesses are the drivers of our economy. So I would like to see money geared towards Black small businesses. We can't just say small businesses, because when we say that, Black people are always left out. We have to make sure that it is given towards our people and our businesses. In addition to that, even though I personally am not a graduate of one, I have always given money to HBCUs, particularly Jackson State University. I would like to see HBCUs receive higher funding. I would also like to see African Americans at the P through 12 level. I think that we talk a lot about funding for college. We don't talk enough about funding for early childhood education. We know that, to get off the right foot and to start right, you have to make sure that early childhood education is funded at the level it needs to be, and that all young people have the opportunity to have those advancements in technology that I've seen in suburbs with kids who grow up and go to some of these Ivy League universities, as well as on to state colleges, and don't have to worry about funding. I don't see those same opportunities in the communities like South Shore that I live in. So I get very frustrated at things like that. And I think that we need to make sure that we are providing equity in education, starting at some of our younger ages first, because we have to make the foundation, because by the time you get to high school, it's too late. And as someone who's worked in education, I see so much that we talk about at the high school level and the college level. Meanwhile, I've worked with students who are juniors in high school and they're reading on third grade level. It is impossible for even the best teacher in our system to bring that kid up within one calendar year. So we have to make sure that we're working with these people as they're growing and as they're going through pre-K and elementary school as well. In addition to that, I would definitely say a jobs bill, because again, we know that COVID-19 hit everybody, but just like that saying about when America gets a cold, Black America gets the flu, that's exactly what happened with COVID-19. We have to make sure that when we're talking about jobs and job gains and job skills training, that we're doing things specifically for the African American community that is going to take a very long time to be able to rise above what we've seen currently in terms of the crisis that we've seen from COVID-19. But I also think that we need to not think in small terms. Part of the issue that we have at the federal level is that so many people, when they want to do something for Black people, it's piecemeal. It's, we can only do this much. And if this small thing we do, then we're not going to come back to it for another 30, 40, 50 years. That's not what we need to do. We need to make sure that we are rising this community that has done so much and provided so much for the American economy and this country, because African Americans are a vital part of America, and making sure that we aren't doing anything that is too small. And I get tired being in policy of incremental change. We need large scale change. We need to make sure that we are providing healthcare for our people. We need to make sure that the maternal mortality rate that is killing Black women at 4 times the rate of white women and looks like sub-Saharan Africa in the wealthiest nation on earth in America is gotten rid of. Because there's absolutely no reason why a Black woman who looks like any of the women on this call should go to a hospital and die doing something that we have been doing since the dawn of time. It frustrates me that we have a system that is set up to where there are these consistent inequities in some of our most basic things. In policing, we know that, the gun violence and the death rate that results from police brutality affects Black people at rates that are astronomical. And it's not because police need more training, because Lord knows they don't shoot white people in the same circumstances, even when they have weapons, even when they have knives, even when they do attack them. I have been in places where I've seen the drunken white girl knock the living hell out of a police officer. She didn't get arrested, nothing happened. But if you look sideways, or if you have a tailpipe that's broken, you just might not get out of that with your life as an African American. And I think that we need to present policy that speaks to that showcases why this is important, and not take no for an answer. And I think that because the African American vote turned out with such power this past election cycle, it is going to be very hard for congressional leaders, specifically in the Democratic Party, to tell Black people no. Because the only reason Joe Biden is where he is right now is because his road to victory ran through the Black community.
Yes, you're so right. Another person asked Anthony, what can we do about and for gang culture?
Give them something else. Give them something else to dream of, and give them something else to be. And I say this because as someone who I worked in Chicago youth centers. I sit on the board for Chicago youth centers. I've worked in the schools. At the end of the day, I knew kids who became gang members because they needed to help keep the lights on and food on the table because their mothers were strung out, because their mothers were in and out of prison, because they didn't have fathers at home, because they lived in communities where they had to have guns to be able to get back safely to cross a turf where they were getting threatened every single day. So there's there's a heart in me that goes out to specifically young people who are recruited by gangs when there's nothing else around them. I was there when community centers were closed because we had a governor in Rauner who decided that he was not going to fund them. So the one places that these young people could go to for, for hope, for basketball, for other sports, to talk to counselors, to have basically an outlet, they no longer had. And you know what's there for them when that's not? The guy on the corner who's trying to get them to sell drugs. He's always there. So at the end of the day, I think that when we talk about gang culture, we also have to think about what we have to do to eradicate it. We have to give kids dreams. We have to make sure that there are programs there for them so that they are not on the street corners by themselves. We have to make sure that there are wraparound services available for their parents so that these kids won't be scraping and working multiple jobs just so that they can help feed their siblings. We have to make sure that, we're providing for not just four-year college educations. I worked at City Colleges of Chicago as well. What we need to do is also emphasize our fast track programs, that there are jobs that will pay you $70,000, $80,000, $90,000 a year, and you only have to train for 6 months or less. We need to stop acting as though this is a one size fits all when it comes to education and skills training. We need to make sure that we are also pushing our young people to show to them, and not so young people, because these skills-based trainings can happen for people of any age group. We need to be able to show them that there's a path other than that. And when we don't, we end up falling into this crisis of gun and gang culture. But the issue isn't just guns and gangs. So I want to move away from the framing of that question. The issue is that we have deeply impoverished communities that are not getting the funds and the supports necessary from the city government as well as the state government. And we have a lack of opportunity in places where you eradicate lack, in places where you eradicate need, in places where you eradicate boarded up buildings, in places where there aren't food deserts, in places where there is economic development. You don't have these issues. So I want to emphasize the fact that the city of Chicago and cities across the country like it have to have a development process that pays attention to poverty, that doesn't treat poverty as criminal, that doesn't allow for that. Because when you do, people become the lowest common denominator. If you can't feed your family, if you got locked up on a small marijuana charge, which trust and believe so many Black men do, and meanwhile, there are white people who are buying into the dispensaries every single day and making money off of theirs and never going to prison, that's a problem for me. When you are that kid who got those charges at 13, 14 years old, and now you're 30 and you can't get a job to feed your family, what are you going to do? So I think that at the end of the day, we have to reimagine how we're thinking about our economy. You have to reimagine where we want our young people to go. And we have to invest in those points, because when you don't, you end up with this serious crisis of ability. It's not, people aren't on the streets or becoming gang members because they want to become gang members, because they love the life, because they saw, they saw Hustle and Flow and thought it was great. They're doing it because they feel like there's nothing else there, because they've been locked out of opportunity. Where opportunity meets Black people meet opportunity. And we have to make sure that we're providing that.
Wow, thank you. I know that you have to get on the air soon. There's one more question and then I'm going to turn it over to Christy. But the question is kind of related. It's from Monique, asking about, for younger people, there seems to be a lot of apathy toward the two-party system within our government. And she's asking, what do you think can help get them more engaged in the political process, especially on a local level?
First of all, I like y'all, so I'll stay for a few more minutes. I see that Dr. Love's in here. She was one of my professors. Welcome, Dr. Love. So I hear that question, and Monique, I thank you for it, because what we see now is that young, and it's not just young people, old people are frustrated too. Our two-party system, if you are African-American, if you were born in this country and you are a descendant of slaves, the two-party system has not done you any justice. Like, you're not going to catch me saying it was great, just like you won't catch anybody else who's a person of color saying it was great. What we have to recognize is that the structure of America, everything about this country and the way it was created, the way that it makes money, the way our economy works, the way our education system works, the way our criminal justice system works, has been built off the backs of oppressing Black people. And it doesn't matter who's at the helm, whether that person is a Democrat or a conservative. What you end up seeing is that it always tends to go back to the mean at some point. And we have to consistently fight for representation, not only as Black people running for elected office, but also as Black people who need to see policy change that mirrors what we need to see done in our communities. And I understand the frustration of the two-party system, but I will say, unless you guys have seen some third-party system that's doing things a whole lot better, that's not necessarily the answer either. What we need to do is force both parties to be responsive to our needs. force both parties to understand that Black people in America are here to stay. Force both parties to understand that we are not lower class citizens. Force both parties to understand that we have goals and we have ambition and we have dreams and that we are a vital part of the fabric of this country. But I think that one of the other things that we need to do is once we do get our elected leaders in who get in and they talk about, healthcare for all or Medicare for all, who talk about education that lifts all boats, is shaking them up. And I say that because I've also read a lot about what the Justice Democrats are doing, what AOC is doing, what we're seeing from some of the socialist leftist side of the wing of the party. And what I don't see is a lot of things that are driven, again, specifically towards Black people, because there's a problem with the lift all boats mentality. It doesn't work. We have seen it time after time after time, and the boats that don't get lifted are ironically those that are Black. We have to make sure that there are things that are geared specifically towards Black people, because the plight of Black people in America is very different than that of any other culture or demographic. And it's because of the decades long, the hundreds of years long of us being slaves in this country, being property longer than we were able to own or have property of our own, having systems that were built up in education, but also in criminal justice reform, also in lending, in job acquisition, that were built against us in a way that has not been done to any other demographic of people. And until we can shake down and eradicate those systems and make them equal, make equity a top mainframe, not something that you just hashtag Black Lives Matter because it was the thing to do, or paint Black Lives Matter Plaza hashtag DC or any other city that did it. Meanwhile, Black people are still hella unemployed. I need you to do more. And I need Black people to understand that symbolism doesn't work. Corporations, elected officials, they love to speak to Black people in symbols, because then we move on to the next shiny thing. They give you something, put your name on something or the name of some famous Black person, nothing ever, comes through, and then they move on to the next great thing for them. We need to make sure that we give them specific concrete policy goals. This is what we want for our community. And you don't take no for an answer. I believe in compromise. Compromise is a great thing. But when it comes to Black people, compromise ain't working. We tried it for years and we ended up compromising our way out of success. So at this point, we have to make sure that we are holding them to the fire, and that when they tend to, shrink back like they often do, that we make that fire hotter. Because that's the only way we're ever going to get anything done.
Yes. We have another question, since you're going to stay with us a little longer. From Anthony Porter, why do you suppose we seem to have done better before most government help? He teaches at a maximum security prison in Northern California.
Really good question. And I think that the narrative around government assistance is incorrect, because quite frankly, African Americans, it depends on how you define doing better. Because I can go back to pre-Reconstruction. Throughout American history, there isn't a time where African Americans were doing exceptionally well. But if we talk about specifically what we saw happen after Reconstruction, where we had Black people who had been recently released slaves, who were starting to, till their own land and have their own property, who actually at that time, we had more Black people in Congress than we've ever had in American history. However, as soon as Black people had that smidget of success, they came and took it away. It was one of those instances where we saw the burning of our community, specifically because we were making money. We were, economically viable. It was when we saw the night riders come and, get rid of people's homes because Black people were doing too well. It was a time where we saw so much difficulty. And it was also a time where, the push to go back to yesteryear was something. That's why for me personally, and for a lot of Black people, Make America Great Again was a very problematic mantra. But the frustration here is this. First of all, government help was not meant for us. I think we have to coax the argument in that. The government assistance projects, the housing insecurity at HUD and things like that, when we were talking about food stamps and Medicaid, all of this was designed to help a population that did not look like us. It was actually designed to help poor white people. Even when we talk about even when we talk about the quota system and the systems around education in terms of bringing in more diverse learners. Diverse learners never meant Black people. So when somebody talks to you about that, specifically, being somewhat of a token at a university, they don't recognize that affirmative action has benefited more white women than anybody else. Affirmative action has benefited 85% of white women. Actually, the majority of white college graduates who are female got there because of affirmative action. It wasn't us. So we have to remember that when we talk about the benefits that came along with government, it was never meant for Black people. And when we talk about the demonization of Black people who are on government assistance, be it whether it's Medicaid, be it whether it's food stamps, be it whether it's any one of those types of supports, what we end up seeing is a demonization of Black people, even though we are a much smaller percentage of those who are on it than we see of white people. The welfare queens that Reagan was talking about never looked like the white women in the trailer park. It always looked like me. So I think that we have a problem when we say that, things were better before government assistance, because for Black people, things weren't better then, they aren't better now. But what we had then that was better, I will give you this, is that we had a community and a structure of family that was different. And I think that that is a driving factor that we have gotten away from. And it's not just Black people. Historically, across this country, people have gotten away from it. But white people don't necessarily have the burden that we do, because economically they've always been further ahead. So their households, even if they don't have a dad there, tend to be stronger than ours happen to be, because they live in communities where they don't have to worry about some of the ills of, the urban society that we do. They don't have somebody selling drugs on the corner. They don't have the gun and gang violence. For the most part, they don't live in those communities. That doesn't mean that, single moms in Appalachia don't have it hard as well, but it's a very different reality when we're talking about that. So I think that when we look at government assistance programs, which I'm not against, I think that government assistance programs are here for a reason, and that they help people. And we actually, in my opinion, especially for food stamps and things like that, there are a ton more people who qualify than actually use them. We need to make sure that we are providing for people who need that level of assistance. But beyond that, we need to make sure that we're also providing for them to be able to have a life after that. And what we have done in the African-American community, in terms of the breakdown of the family, in terms of the breakdown of the community, is that through the criminal justice system, they took a lot of Black men out of the household for ridiculous reasons that they're just now recognizing are a problem. Not because they love Black men and have woke, all of a sudden become woke, but because they recognize that it costs the state a whole lot of money to keep them housed on ridiculous charges. I think that what we have to do to get back to that mean is to make sure that we re-strengthen our families and our communities, because Black women can't carry it alone. Black women are some of the strongest people I've ever met in my entire life. But at the end of the day, if you're carrying your community, if you're carrying the jobs, if you're carrying election cycles, that's a lot of weight. And there's some strong people, but you're going to need a little bit of help. So I do think that we need to make sure that we are doing more in terms of being more inclusive and building this soldier group of Black men as well, who are able to walk in and to step in to take those roles, even if they aren't the kids' fathers, even if they aren't, even if they aren't the majority in schools. We know that the majority of our teachers are white women. We need Black males in the lives of young people, and not just boys. We need them in the lives of young Black girls as well, because it matters to have that male influence. And I think that, over time, that's been something that's been eroded, and we definitely see the negative effects of that.
So profound. Thank you so much. So I'm going to turn it over to Christy.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Amisha, for staying longer than expected. I know I appreciate it. I'm sure everyone here does as well. You're such a powerhouse, and it's always a pleasure to hear you speak. A million thanks to you, and congratulations on your engagement.
Thank you so much.
Lots of fun planning ahead. So thank you so much. And Jeri, thank you too for leading us through that discussion. We appreciate it. Just the last portion of this program, we had open to just all of our participants to stay and to chat. If there's any, any intros you'd like to do, or any other questions you have for each other, or also if you have any recommendations for our Black Alumni Association. This is certainly our kickoff event, which we're very excited about it, and very gracious to have Amisha and Jeri and Adrian join us. But we are looking to next year, because we're wrapping up 2020, and are really open to hearing if you have any recommendations or suggestions on future programming and events. Hi, Janet. Seeing quite a few people here. It's great.
Hi.
That are joining us.
Hi.
Hi, Janet.
Hi, Marilyn.
Oh, I just realized my mic was on. that had been unmuted. Yeah.
Yeah, hi
How's
everyone.
it
It's great to see you all on the call. I'm Toya Stewart. I do work here at Roosevelt. And an
Okay.
alumna too, so
Hi,
yeah.
Toya.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you all.
Well, I think this was great.
Yes. Oh my
This
gosh,
was
it
great.
was.
She was all in my head with her. With her. Yeah, she's a powerhouse.
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I don't know hmm? I heard someone say something.
I did enjoy it, and I will come back more.
Yeah, I don't know I was gonna say with COVID still out there and things don't seem to be getting better. It doesn't seem like we're moving back to normal. We're moving away from normal. I don't have any ideas other than to continue with some Zoom,
Yeah.
events and just stay connected that way,
Yeah. I think even when things do go back to like face to face, it will be nice to still have, some of the Zoom meetings because like if it's inclement weather or
This is true.
just not able to get out to all the events physically, being able to still connect this way is really nice. I
It
miss
is.
I miss hugging people though because I'm a hugger. Yes,
Mhm.
I thought, yeah, to virtually hug. Yeah,
Yeah,
my
yeah,
my family has to pay the price that I'm not getting hugs from everywhere. So, and I have a house full of guys, and so they're like,
okay.
oh,
Here she comes.
yeah.
That's good. That's good. Yeah, it's a challenge, but we adapt.
Yeah.
Uh, we'll get through this. We'll get
Oh
through it.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's just some days it just seems like, oh, I'm not gonna make it. But then I said, okay, have your little pity party, and I give myself about, a few minutes to really kind of get into it, and then I, kind of dig myself out of it.
Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah, well, the homebodies are definitely loving this, and then the the extroverts are kind of like having those moments where you just
Hmm.
gotta get out. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I'm happy that we have this, and I look forward to more. Maybe we can mix it up and have some more lighter topics.
Hmm.
Although everything that was addressed today had to be spoken, and she's in a position where she can actually um, but her voice can be heard,
Hmm.
and I think that she's a great representative of Blacks in general.
Mhm. Good.
Yeah.
Well, it's Marilyn. Do you have any recommendations on topics or anyone else?
Oh boy, she touched on quite a few. Um, I could see maybe expounding on some of the points that she maybe having speakers on who can expound on some of the points that were made by our speaker today. If we're going to stay on well, this is the Black Alumni uh, Association, so I would imagine that we would be having speakers who address topics that are of interest and concerning the Black community. So, wow. Yeah, I would say maybe do another survey to figure out exactly, if we could, as an association, um, pull, maybe 2 or 3 top issues that we
Mhm.
want to hear more about, and maybe have some people on who can give us some actionable steps that we can take to implement in our spheres of influence, so to speak, or as a organization or group as a whole, you know?
We may also need to know their backgrounds to find out where they really might need help that they don't need the help in. Like, for one of the things I've noticed, a lot of people, even in college, have no sense of money or finances.
So that's a topic.
Yeah.
This is true.
And yeah, and Marilyn, you mentioned a survey, and you were in our initial brainstorm session, right? Yes, okay. We had some alumni join us.
Oops, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, you cut out, so go ahead.
I don't know how many of us actually participated in that, so that's why I threw that idea out there again.
Yeah, we are, so everyone's aware, we are going to be sending out a survey, and I think that's a great way, right? I just kind of put you on the spot, like, hey, share ideas. But so I think that'll give everyone some time to kind of reflect and think about maybe some topics or speakers, or if you have any recommendations, you know, we're certainly open to hearing those, and hosting, you know, events around what topics from the community. So yeah, keep an eye out for that survey because it's coming.
Okay, very good. Yeah, because I would imagine the alumni, you know, the alumni are at different stages, levels in their lives, their businesses, and so forth. So they're, you know, what's important to one may not be important to someone else. So that survey would help you identify the main focuses.
Yeah, I agree. That's a good point. And I think to have some variety is certainly important. A survey will help us identify that.
Well, I have a question Christy, have you spoken with any students? Have they come up to you and asked or given some suggestions as to what they want with the Black alumni?
Oh, thanks for your question, Carol. That's going to be part of the survey. Is not only surveying our alumni, but surveying our students too. And I think especially our upcoming alumni, you know, our seniors who are going to be joining the alumni community soon, we certainly are going to all of our students, but want to make sure that they are, you know, we're looking at ways to make sure that they're participating and, you know, sharing their thoughts and ideas. Well, we're wrapping up the hour. I can certainly keep the room open for anyone who wants to stay or chat. And but thank you all for joining. I think everyone really appreciated the discussion. And Jeri, thank you again so much for leading this discussion today. You did an amazing job, and we're very appreciative. So thank you all. If I don't get a chance to talk to any of you before the holiday season approaches, have a wonderful holiday season. Stay safe, stay healthy. Everyone, please stay healthy, right? And again, you'll hear from us soon over email with a survey and some more information on what we're looking to do next.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Christy. And Jeri did an awesome job, and everyone.
Yay.